The smell of cinnamon and roasted peppers still reminds me of the night everything began to unravel. If someone had told me that stepping into my neighbor's kitchen would expose the quiet fractures in my marriage, I would have laughed. At the time, I believed the real danger was boredom. I didn't yet understand that loneliness can be far more persuasive than desire. Daniel Whitmore and I had been married for 7 years, long enough for our routines to feel permanent and our silences to feel normal. He worked as a corporate consultant, which sounded impressive and paid well, but it also meant airports, late-night calls, and dinners eaten alone. When he was home, his mind rarely was. He carried tension like a tailored jacket, sharp, fitted, impossible to remove that I used to wait up for him. I used to cook his favorite meals and rehearse conversations in my head, so I wouldn't overwhelm him when he walked through the door. Over time, those rehearsals stopped. It became easier to say nothing than to watch him nod absently while scrolling through emails. "You're overthinking again, Elena," his sister Tara would tell me whenever I confided in her. Tara Whitmore had a way of sounding supportive while subtly shifting the blame. "Daniel's just under pressure. Don't take it personally." Not take it personally. As if marriage were a weather pattern, I simply had to endure. The house next door had been empty for months before Malik Adeyemi moved in. I noticed him first through my office window, a tall man unloading boxes with careful precision. He moved with quiet deliberation, as though each item carried memory. We met properly 2 days later when my mailbox came loose from its post. I was crouched on the sidewalk, tried to steady it, when a calm voice said, "It looks like it needs reinforcement, not force." I looked up to find Malik standing a few feet away, offering a small, respectful smile. His presence felt steady rather than imposing. Within minutes, he had secured the post with tools from his garage. "Thank you," I said, brushing dirt from my hands. "Neighbors should be useful to each other," he replied. "I'm Malik. Elena." There was no awkwardness, no unnecessary familiarity, just courtesy. Over the next few weeks, I became aware of him in small, sensory ways. The scent of simmering spices drifted through my kitchen window in the evenings. Low music played while I washed dishes. Sometimes I would see him in his backyard, tending to herbs with focused patience. One afternoon, we spoke again as I returned from the grocery store. He carried a basket of fresh vegetables. "I run a small catering business," he explained when I commented on the aromas. "Cooking keeps my hands busy." "In your mind?" I asked before I could stop myself. Thought he hesitated, then answered honestly. "It helps with that too." I learned that Malik had lost his wife 3 years earlier. He didn't elaborate, and I didn't pry, but grief lingered in the pauses between his sentences. There was something disarming about his openness. He did not perform strength. He simply practiced it. That night, Daniel called from Chicago to say his flight home would be delayed again. "Don't wait up," he said briskly. "We'll talk this weekend. We'll talk this weekend." As if our marriage were an agenda item. The power went out an hour later. I stood in my dark kitchen, phone flashlight trembling slightly in my hand. The outage stretched across the block, but Malik's house glowed faintly with backup lighting. A few minutes later, there was a knock on my door. "I have a generator running for the kitchen," he said gently when I opened it. "If you need light or food, you're welcome to come over until it's restored." I should have declined. I could have lit candles and waited alone. Instead, I grabbed a sweater and followed him next door. His kitchen felt warm in more ways than one. Soft yellow light illuminated wooden counters and neatly arranged spices. A pot simmered on the stove, releasing an aroma that was both earthy and sweet. "Sit," Malik said, handing me a glass of water. "You can supervise." "I'm not qualified," I replied, surprised by my own smile. "Then I'll teach you." He showed me how to slice peppers properly, how to toast spices until they release their fragrance, how to taste slowly rather than rushing judgment. His instructions were patient, never condescending. When I made a clumsy cut, he laughed. Not at me, but with me. "You don't cook much?" he asked. "I used to," I admitted. "Daniel travels so much now. It feels pointless." "Cooking is never pointless," he said quietly. "It's an offering, even if it's only to yourself." The words settled deeper than I expected. We talked while the stew thickened. About his catering business. About my freelance design projects. about how quiet houses can feel heavier than noisy ones. He listened in a way Daniel no longer did. Eyes steady, phone nowhere in sight. I sometimes think I become background noise in my own marriage. I confessed before caution could intervene. Malik didn't rush to fix the statement. Being unseen can make anyone question their worth, he said carefully. But it doesn't mean you lack it. No one had said something like that to me in years. When the power returned, I almost felt disappointed. The overhead lights flickered back to life, breaking the soft intimacy of the generator's glow. I thanked him for the meal and the company. "You're welcome anytime, Elena," he said. "Neighbors should look out for each other." The walk back to my house fell shorter than usual. Inside, the air seemed colder. Daniel had texted again. Flight pushed to tomorrow morning. Big meeting first thing. "We'll catch up later." I stared at the message longer than necessary. No apology. No question about my evening. Just logistics. Through my kitchen window, I could see Malik's silhouette moving behind warm curtains. For the first time in a long while, I felt something other than numbness. It wasn't love. It wasn't even desire. It was recognition. And recognition can be dangerous. I told myself it had been harmless, just conversation, just food, just light during a blackout. Yet as I turned off my own kitchen lamp, I knew something subtle had shifted. I had stepped into another person's warmth because my own home felt cold. I thought the risk was developing feelings for a neighbor who understood me, but I didn't realize the deeper betrayal was already waiting in the shadows of my marriage, quiet and patient, preparing to reveal itself. After that night, I began to notice everything I had previously trained myself to overlook. It wasn't that Emily and Ryan changed their behavior dramatically. It was that I stopped editing reality to make it easier to accept. Patterns emerged where I once saw coincidence. Silences grew heavier. The house felt occupied by conversations I was no longer part of. Mornings became especially revealing. Emily woke earlier than she used to, moving through the kitchen with quiet purpose. Ryan often joined her, coffee mug in hand, their voices low and familiar. When I entered, the rhythm shifted. Topics changed. Smiles softened. I told myself this was courtesy, not secrecy, but the distinction grew thinner each day. Emily was different with me, not unkind, just distant in a way that suggested her emotional energy was being spent elsewhere. When I spoke, she listened politely rather than fully. When I asked how she was feeling, she answered with efficiency, not honesty. It felt as though I was speaking to someone who had already had the conversation I was trying to start, just not with me. Ryan, for his part, seemed torn between gratitude and guilt. He avoided prolonged eye contact with me, yet went out of his way to help around the house. He fixed a leaky faucet, mowed the lawn without being asked, thanked me repeatedly for letting him stay. His politeness felt rehearsed, like someone trying to prove they deserve their place. Point one afternoon, I came home earlier than expected. The car was still in the driveway, and the house was quiet except for voices coming from the living room. I paused again, not because I wanted to listen, but because my body seemed to understand something my mind was still resisting. Emily was speaking, her tone calm, but weighted with emotion. She talked about choices, about how people slowly drift into lives they never intended to live. Ryan responded quietly, telling her that she was the only person who seemed to understand him. There was no flirtation in his voice, only dependence. That somehow made it worse. That I stepped into the room, and both of them looked up too quickly. Emily smiled first, the way people do when they want to reassure rather than connect. Ryan stood up immediately, offering to run an errand that didn't need to be done. I nodded, grateful for the space, but unsettled by how easily it was created. Later that evening, Emily and I sat across from each other at dinner. The silence between us felt deliberate. I considered asking her directly what was happening, but fear stopped me. Not fear of her answer, but fear of what the answer would require me to do. Confrontation felt like standing at the edge of something irreversible. Instead, I asked about her day. She answered, then asked about mine. The exchange was polite, symmetrical, and empty. Marriage, I realized, can survive many things, but indifference is not one of them. That night, Emily didn't come to bed until late again. This time, I stayed awake. When she entered the room, she hesitated, as if deciding whether honesty was worth the trouble. She chose quiet instead, slipping under the covers without a word. I turned toward her, wanting to bridge the gap, but the distance felt intentional, guarded. The following days blurred together. Ryan remained in the house, but his presence felt increasingly complicated. Emily continued to support him emotionally, offering advice, encouragement, and understanding. She was becoming the person he leaned on, the one he trusted most. I watched it happen with the strange detachment of someone witnessing a slow accident, unable to intervene without causing damage of another kind. That I spoke to Laura one afternoon, meeting her for coffee under the pretense of catching up. I didn't tell her everything. I didn't have the language for it yet. I only said that Emily felt far away and that something in my home felt unsettled. Laura listened carefully, reminding me that emotional distance doesn't appear overnight. It grows where communication stops. Her words stayed with me. That evening, I finally found the courage to speak. I asked Emily if she was happy. The question landed harder than I expected. She looked at me for a long moment, then said she didn't know. It wasn't an accusation, but it wasn't reassurance either. That answer told me what I needed to know. Whatever was happening between Emily and Ryan might not have crossed a visible line, but it had already crossed an emotional one. Trust, once stretched thin, does not return to its original shape. As I lay awake that night, I understood that silence was no longer an option and that the next conversation we had would change everything.